across the globe. My name is Rajam, and on behalf of the Mumbai Palliative Care Network, I am both overjoyed and overwhelmed to welcome you to this evening's webinar. I would love to request you to please make this webinar an interactive and an engaging one by sending your questions in the chat box throughout the session, and we will take it up during the end of the session. In the next hour or so, my esteemed colleagues will share their experiences and highlight the need and significance of palliative care, and also emphasize on the fact that it is a basic human right. We are commemorating today and having this webinar today to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the World Hospice and Palliative Care Day, and a few lines on the theme for this year. Respect for life and everyone's welfare. COVID-19 pandemic is everywhere in the air. Together we support each other and prepare. My care, my comfort is our message to share. With this, I hand over to Swati Chakravarti Bhatkal, who's very happily and readily agreed to be the moderator for this evening. Swati is a journalist and a documentary filmmaker, and she has directed Rubaru Roshni and co-directed Satyamev Jayate. She believes in using creativity to make this world a better place. Over to you, Swati. Thank you so much. And thank you all of you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iyer, for this kind introduction. Delighted to see so many people here. Before we begin this webinar, I'd like to request that we all maintain a few moments of silence in memory of all those who have passed on in this unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. So let us remember and cherish them. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm extremely pleased to welcome to this conversation our very first speaker, Dr. Marianne Mukadan. Dr. Mukadan, you were the first person to start a postgraduate course in palliative care at the Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai. I'd really love to know, what was your inspiration in pioneering this work in Mumbai?
Okay, thank you, Swati. Thanks everybody for this wonderful chance we have all had to put across some little thoughts about palliative care. So I'll start with a little story. It's the year 1995 and I'm 12 years into my radiation oncology career in the Tata Memorial Hospital. And we have to cure, there's no question, we just have to cure everybody. So I am in the ward, it's afternoon, it's about 3:30 in the afternoon. And there is a patient who I have come to see. She's my patient. She's got admitted because she has very, very advanced cancer and she's now terminal. So I hear her screaming, "Doctor, I don't want to die. Doctor, I don't want to die. You have to do something. This just can't be happening." And it really, really, really hurt me. It hurt me so much that I came out to the nursing station and I told my student, "Listen, just do something, give her an injection of Campos and just calm her down," because I had kind of started trembling. So in today's world, we would call this palliative sedation, but in those days when it was radiation, oncology, it was, we have to cure everybody, and how can we even think about allowing a person to die in the ward without taking them to the ICU, without ventilation or CPR, and while the family is outside, and then you just hand over a dead body. So that's something which really, really struck me and hurt me in the year 1995. And it also happened that just in that year itself, there were these two stalwarts from the UK, Dr. Robert Twycross and Jilly Byrne, who was a nurse, who came and visited the Tata Hospital. And it kind of struck something in me that maybe this is a time when I've got to think of doing something else besides trying to cure everybody, which we know doesn't happen in India because more than 50% of cancer patients come in a very advanced stage. So that's where it started, me all by myself, alone in the Tata Hospital, trying to introduce palliative care. I have to say that there was, supportive administration, but supportive, okay, you do 50%, I won't allow you to do 100% because you're going to burn out, and therefore you do radiation and palliative care. So as a lone person, I started a clinic. I got a nurse. I had social workers who were very supportive of the whole thing. And we were really, really lucky to have volunteers. You know, we had NGOs, we had We Care, we had Cancer Patient Aid Association. So at least I think 7 or 8 of them joined, and we had this little clinic which carried on. We started doing a little bit of education, but somewhere along the line, I realized that I can't just be doing palliative care. And therefore, there has to be an effort to do palliative medicine. So that's where I started with the help of the administration, the dean at that point of time, Dr. Mohandas, director who was supportive, and therefore we try to now convert palliative care into palliative medicine or palliative care medicine, as I wanted to call it actually. So we had to do we had to build up the infrastructure. We had to have one more consultant. We had to have lots of research. We had to have library. We had to do everything which MCI required. And therefore, from those days of 1995, 1996, when I started the clinic, when we used to do small teaching programs all over, in Mumbai and even outside, we then went forward. We applied to MCI. We were recognized with all the, the things which were required for a MD degree. And finally, in the year 2002, we took the first 2 students. So palliative medicine became a specialty, holding hands with medicine, surgery, pediatrics. Wow, wasn't that wonderful? But I think 8 years down the line, we still have a long way to go for not only for, I mean, students come because now we have an MD we have it in Mumbai in Tata Hospital, we have it in AIIMS, we have it in Global Cancer Research Institute in Ahmedabad. Next year, Manipal will start, probably Bikaner will start. And yes, there are more on the anvil. But if you actually see the number of postgraduate students which pass out every year, I think there's a huge need for more and more institutions to take it up. You can't just start it overnight. We have to get medical, now it's called National Medical Council. We have to get the recognition. We have to fill in for the requirements. And that is where I think I would be really, really happy if maybe in the next 2 or 3 years, more and more institutions would try to get their act together and put palliative medicine out there, just like all the other specialties. And someday we would like to even start a super specialty like pediatric palliative care. I think simultaneously there is a pediatric palliative care session which is going on, and we are doing something with pediatrics. We're doing something with family medicine. We would very much like to do something with geriatrics. And therefore, we're really trying to put palliative care out there. So in the Bible, it says, when I was a stranger, you invited me in. When I was sick, you looked after me. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of these, the least of my brothers and sisters, you did it to me. All religions say the same thing. There are poor, there are needy, there are those who don't want to die, like my patient in 1995. They want to be cared for. They want to die with dignity. They want to die in a place of their choice. And if we are able, now that we have started the MD and we are reaching out to other medical specialties, I've also forgot to mention that we're going to be starting a diploma in palliative nursing very soon. And we also have programs which we do for social work colleges. So I would really, really say that we've gone a long way by holding hands with many people who have joined us through the years. We have this wonderful Mumbai network now. All of us work together. And I think with so many people now on board, I don't feel alone anymore. And I really think that there's lot. And I'm really, really happy for you giving me the chance to, start this session. Because with so many people and so much of interest, I really feel that we will be going, very fast from now. Thank you very much.
How wonderful, Dr. Mukhadan. It was so amazing listening to you, from the inspiration of an individual to the creation of institutions. What an inspiring journey, really. I'm extremely pleased to welcome our next guest, Dr. Baman Dhabar. A very, very warm welcome to you, sir. You are a very well-known senior oncologist, a cancer specialist. You are attached to 4 leading hospitals in Mumbai. Could you tell us about why palliative care matters in cancer treatment?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, just to give you a broad outline, what happens in our practice. As soon as the cancer diagnosis is done, the journey starts. Many people here are not able to accept a diagnosis or what we say the fears or inhibitions of treatment. Like what are our three treatment arms? Systemic therapy, we medical oncologists do that. As ma'am told you, Mary, radiation oncology and surgical oncology. And we are all aware of so many advances which have occurred in this field. But what is the benefit of these advances if the patient do not take it? If these fears, if these inhibitions do not allow our patient to go through this, then I think so it's a waste of all these advances. So this is the first step, I would say, that our palliative care team groups in. And this is why I would call this as our fourth arm, which bridges and goes into and allows the patient to go into the active treatment. So what Meher's ma'am told us that this starts at the end, but no, nowadays everybody, and I'm sure, I know ma'am also knows that this starts from day one. Palliative care should start from day one when the patient is diagnosed to make their whole journey very smooth. This what we have to give is not only the physical, the spiritual strengthening they require for all the patients and the caretakers to go through. The second halt, what in in oncology rather, what we see is when the treatment goes on smoothly, the boat is sailing smooth. Well, it goes on. At that time, of course, the palliative team interacts with the patient to gain their confidence. The second halt comes, when we evaluate the disease. When we evaluate the disease, either there is a response or there is no response, or sometimes the toxicity. This is again at the point of time, there are so many questions which come up in the patient and their caretaker's mind. And many times as a busy oncologist, it may be very, very difficult for us to answer those questions. We of course tell them whatever is possible and whatever time limits we have. So again, this is the time when we require in our routine practice, the palliative care team to rope in. Should I go on? The third is of course, when untoward things are very imminent, as we heard from Dr. Mary, when the treatment stops working. Again, this is the time, as many times you require a palliative care team to come in and give them the idea that, yes, this is the time frame, this is this. We of course tell them whatever is possible from a medical oncology, from the oncologist perspective. But again, this is the time when we require a whole team behind us to help us and sort this out.
That was extremely lucid, Dr. Davar. Thank you so much. It's lovely to understand that there is a fourth arm to help cancer patients along, and that palliative medicine, palliative care can come in right from the beginning and play such a beautiful role, physical, spiritual, etc. Thank you so much, sir. My next question is for Dr. Rajam Iyer. Dr. Iyer, you have been a practicing pulmonologist. You've been a chest medicine specialist for many years. And in your experience, what is the scope or need for palliative care in conditions other than cancers? And especially in the light of COVID-19 pandemic, is there something that you could share with all of us?
So thank you very much. What I would wanted to say is, yes, still about 4 years ago, I was a pulmonologist, and palliative care field was totally alien to me. Till a personal bereavement, the loss of my dad got me thinking to what else I could do to comfort patients who are in the similar field. If you actually sit and see the number of percentage of Indians affected by non-cancer conditions or non-communicable diseases or non-malignant conditions, it's, for example, lifestyle diseases like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, stroke, advanced pulmonary diseases, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, etc. It's a staggering 30 to 40% of Indians are affected by non-communicable diseases. And actually, if you look into the trajectory of their illness, these patients spend a very long, prolonged period of time with high symptom burden. And their life journey of this illness is punctuated very often with multiple hospital admissions, frequent visits to the hospital, either OPD or inpatient or even ICUs. So during this journey, the patient and the family go through a lot of total pain as described in palliative medicine, which is not just physical, but social, psychological, spiritual, and even financial. And as the patient becomes more and more frail, as trained healthcare professionals, it is our onus to foresee and foretell and explain to the family and the patient the trajectory of the disease. And therefore, if we communicate effectively and sensitively at the appropriate time, patients, family, and the doctor can help sit together and decide the goals of care for that particular patient, so that unnecessary, aggressive, futile medical treatments are not done towards the end. These things are important if we discuss it much before, because non-cancer or non-communicable diseases somehow are not perceived as life-limiting by patients. For example, a dementia patient is diagnosed dementia and probably dies 8 to 10 years later. But those 8 to 10 years, only the patient and the family knows how traumatic and how devastating it is. And in India, the other staggering statistics is how 55 million Indians go below poverty line every year, trying to save their loved one towards the last 2 weeks of life. And this is a staggering number. Plus, a country with limited resources, we really need to apply our resources to appropriate patients so that we can salvage them and bring them back to life, and not prolong poor quality life of those who are already affected by chronic, incurable, progressive illness. So it is very important, I feel, to integrate palliative care with all specialities, and integrate at a time where we work as a team with the specialist, so that the patient also doesn't feel abandoned and there is a continuing care experience for the patient. And more so, as you asked me, in the COVID pandemic, respiratory medicine, of course, is completely overstretched. I think healthcare professionals, even in the best of the countries, are overwhelmed. It is now more than ever that we need to stand with our patients, family, as well as doctors and nurses, because everybody is overwhelmed and we are not sure when this pandemic is going to get over. We need to select and triage patients to go to the ICU so that they get appropriate care. For those we have realized who are going to have a poor outcome, like elderly with comorbidities, the conversations about what they want to do with their lives should start at homes now, so that in case their health deteriorates, we give them comfort care with the dignity and respect they deserve. So I think now more than ever, every healthcare professional needs to wear the palliative care hat, needs to know the principles and ethics, so that we can give the best care experience for our patients, Swati. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iyer. Lots to learn and lots to think about, actually. Total pain. That's a concept we all need to chew on. And there are plenty of questions that are coming in, and we will take questions after our first round of conversation. Our next panelist actually needs no introduction. It's my privilege to welcome the award-winning actor, writer, and director, Konkona Sen Sharma. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I'd like to ask you, what is it that connects you with the cause of palliative care?
Hi, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for having me. I've actually been part of this particular program for the last few years now, and I'm learning more and more every year myself. I think that, again, because of, this is something which was a completely alien concept to me, as I think it is often for people who are not in the medical field. I mean, even within the medical field, I don't think it's, you know, as you guys were saying, it's very popular, or that many people know about it or even practice it. But definitely for outsiders, for lay people, it is something which is new. It is something that there is very little awareness of. I, also went through a bereavement, a couple of years back, and I think it brought home this point to me very strongly. Unfortunately, my own father was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer a couple of years ago, and we lost him within, I think, a month or two of the diagnosis. And it was, of course, very difficult. And it made me understand how important palliative care is. And it's something that we need to kind of, share this information with more people and make more people aware of it. The thing is that naturally, when you have a very sick patient at home, you feel insecure. You feel like, oh, I'm not going to be able to provide what my, the family member needs. That is why you feel secure going to a hospital. Oh, there are many doctors. This is the safest place, This is what happens to the layperson, to family members, that, oh, in the hospital, they are safe. But what happens is that one is then often in a hospital for very long. And in a hospital, and even though with the best doctors and nurses and the most well-intentioned, healthcare professionals, what happens is you feel like a body at the end of the day. You feel like a body. You don't, and sometimes you are stripped away of what makes you an individual. And that is distressing even at a normal time, and it is, I think, doubly distressing when you are at the end of your life or when you're suffering a lot. And because as family members, one is unable to see suffering, and one doesn't know how to deal with it, you want to bring your your loved one to the hospital, thinking it's the safest place to be. I saw with my own father how uncomfortable he was at the hospital and how often he wanted to go home, in the sense that even though he was completely hooked up and strapped up to all kinds of machines and whatever it is, cables, etc., he was trying to get his chappals all the time to go back. So, how strongly patients want to go back at the end of their life. They don't want to die in a hospital, just another body. They don't want to die like that, And and healthcare, anyway, I mean, of course, for the privileged, for the elite, is very different, but still, healthcare is difficult. It's not easily accessible. Doctors are overburdened, overworked, and even like a GP has so many patients coming and going. I start feeling sorry for the doctor that I'm going to meet, because even in one room, the doctor's cabin, there are 3 different patients, 4 different patients, so many different families, all crowded in together. The doctor's talking to one person, their assistant is talking to another person. And it is a very confusing and bewildering time for the caregivers, for the family, but of course for the patient. And sometimes doctors are not able to tell you clearly what exactly you need. They are not able to. I don't know why. Perhaps it is, I don't know, a difficult thing to say. They are not able to say that, look, you have 2 months. They will say, how long do you want to live? It has happened with me. When my father has asked that how long, how you have, and they have said that, how long do you want to live? 2 years. When separately and privately, they have told us that, it's a matter of weeks or months. So it is all in all a very difficult experience, but and I remember my father, him saying that, the BiPAP machine is so difficult when it's put into the mouth, that it is more difficult than not being able to breathe on your own and unsupported. Why I'm saying these points is because that, small things, when he had a very dry mouth, and he just wanted an ice cube or just a sip of water. And you also feel so bad to call a nurse, because the nurse has so many other patients, so many serious cases to attend to. So you feel very helpless. But the problem is that it is not, and it should not be, a choice of either my father is at home with me where I have nothing to offer him, or he is in a hospital as a body amongst many other bodies. The thing to understand, it is not these 2 extremes. There is something in the middle, and that is, I think, what I have understood as palliative care, that it can bridge these 2 extreme situations. Of course, it is a confusing and scary time for the caregivers, and which is why we need, like, for example, there's something called CAN support, and to a certain extent they do help out in, even in terms of counseling for the caregivers, for the patient, because they have been through the situation many times. For the family, it is the first time. Oh, what will happen here? What can I do for this? And 100 other questions which come up, and each thing is so stressful. But if there was a body, an intermediate body, which can deal with all these different things, because you are constantly talking to the pulmonologist, to the oncologist, to the, the heart specialist, or whatever, all these different doctors are talking to, giving different information, and how to kind of integrate everything and make it more patient specific in terms of, like, what are the symptoms that need to be addressed right now? What is making the patient, my father, so uncomfortable right now? What needs to be addressed? That has to be done, and I think that will give a lot of relief to the patients, to the family, and ultimately to the doctors themselves, to have some of that stress and burden taken away from them, because there is no point, living for very long if there is no quality of life. I think we have all addressed this separately. There is no point living like that in a lot of pain, or just being kept alive, artificially, while you are feeling stressed, while you're feeling that there is a loss of dignity. So definitely for this quality of life, and definitely to be able to kind of consolidate all the different bits of advice that you're getting, and not just in a physical sense, but also in a spiritual sense, also in a psychological sense, to get that counseling, to get that support for the family and for the patient. And all of this can happen in tandem with whatever the whatever the curative treatment is, whatever the doctors are advising. It can happen alongside, which is why, I mean, I really feel that this is something which is very lacking. And I have personally felt this in the case of my father. And I'm just so pleased that there is something like this now, that so many of you have come together to raise awareness. And that step by step, if we are able to do this, then so many people can benefit from this. And I would really like to commend all of you doctors, especially, who are trying so hard to raise this awareness. And I hope that we are able to, because I think that it will benefit everybody in the system. That is what I wanted to share.
Thank you so much, Konkana ji. That was so beautifully and movingly put. I express my sorrow at your loss of your father. And I also want to commend your courage and graciousness that you have taken a personal pain and you have converted it into something that can benefit all of us. So that is absolutely wonderful. Our next speaker for the evening is Sonalini Mirchandani. I'd like to introduce her now. She is a former IFS officer, a member of the civil services, and she is now the founder and CEO of the Communication Hub. Ms. Mirchandani, you have been extremely passionate about palliative care for very many years. What do you think are some of the key issues that need addressing in this sphere?
Thank you, Swati, and thank you for having me on the panel. Firstly, it's a very eminent panel with all the doctors and medical specialists here who have spoken. I am not a doctor. It was very touching to hear Konkana. Can you hear me now? Okay. In particular, I think, the privilege that we have, those of us working in palliative care, the privilege of being allowed into your lives at such intimate moments when the family and the patient is going through so much distress. I mean, everyone working in palliative care is actually honored and privileged to be allowed that. So thank you, Konkana, for sharing that. It means a lot to us. I'm trying to pick up from what my previous panelists have said. And there are two basic issues that I see coming through very strongly. One is going forward, how do we make palliative care more acceptable? And two, going forward, how do we make it more accessible? Now, if we talk of acceptability, it's about addressing a whole bunch of misconceptions that many of us continue to have, that I had before I came into this field. The fact that it's beyond cancer, the fact that it doesn't mean that you're giving up, the fact that if you come on early, you can be with the patient through the trajectory of treatment, through the trajectory of the disease, and provide that extra layer of support, working with those who are working for treatment. So it's not about giving up. It's not only about end of life. And I think that is something that we need to get across. I also think, as somebody mentioned, we hesitate to have conversations about death and dying. We don't like to be confronted with our own mortality. We don't know what to do with such conversations. We are not comfortable. And I think it's important we start talking about these issues within our homes, within our families, within our communities. We need to start talking, because at the end of the day, we don't die very well in India. I mean, the Economist Intelligence Unit put out this study that said that it's called the Quality of Death Index. And out of 80 countries, India is in the bottom 15. We don't die very well in India. We die with a lot of unnecessary, sometimes tubes and ventilators put into our bodies. We also need to look at language. Talking from personal experience, a year ago when I lost my mother, when the form said, sign off on DNR, do not resuscitate, no CPR, no ventilator, no this, no that. And then I had a doctor who's from palliative care who just touched my shoulder and said, you're not denying your mother things, you are allowing natural death. You are facilitating peace You are allowing dignity. You are making it happen. Now, believe me, just those words, allowing natural death and not hold back this and hold back that, went a long distance. So whether it's the words we use, whether it's our own awareness, the other issue about acceptance is also, as many people mentioned, within the medical fraternity. You know, I mean, how much importance is the palliative care physician given as a team member? I mean, do the senior oncologists and cardiologists and neurologists and all the rest of them really see the palliative care members' role as being as important, if not more sometimes, than their own? I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but that is a real fact. We need to bring salience within the medical fraternity. I'd like to shift to the issue of accessibility. And I think one of the previous panelists put it very well. This is about human rights. You know, giving a person access to palliative care is a human rights issue. It is an equity issue. It is about putting the person at the center and not the disease. And to say that, you know, oh, we've got so many other priorities and we can't spend time on this. No, it's not so difficult to integrate palliative care into existing medical specializations. In a country where 6 million have a need for palliative care, only 4% have access to palliative care. That's not a good figure. And if a small state like Kerala can show that it's possible, 3% of India's population and more than the rest of India's palliative care services. If Kerala can show that at a community level, you can make palliative care happen, we can do it. We can do it across the country. We can make morphine available at district level. We can create awareness that morphine is legal. We can train our healthcare providers like the network is doing today. So the momentum has started. The good news is that we've started, but we need to do much more, both in terms of acceptability as well as accessibility. But it's an honor and a privilege for a non-medical person to be associated with such stalwarts in the field and to be able to do my little bit to put the good word out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think you've raised some really important points. Dr. Iyer, are there some questions that you feel should be prioritized to our speakers at this point?
So I think Dr. Ganpati wanted to make a point. So can we unmute Dr. Ganpati and request him to make a point or a comment?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Rajam. While all of you spoke about, the need to bring comfort and care, I think there was a passing reference, but we have to equally emphasize that when you're talking about the concept of total pain or the quality of care, there are psycho-socio-spiritual issues which contribute. In fact, this morning there was a paper that said that only 35% of the physical component of pain is what is important. The balance 65%, the pain to the patient is because of psycho, socio, spiritual. While you did make a very passing reference, the fact that we have Dr. Joyita with us, who's head of clinical psychiatry and who's now the officer in charge of the palliative care. I just wanted to drive home the point that this is something very, very important. It is an unfinished business of the patients and the caregivers that brings great amount of distress to the family. Probably today the science is advanced to the extent that largely the physical pain is controllable, or at least it can be reduced to a bearable limit. I'm not discounting that you have to overlook physical pain. You first address that, definitely, but more important also is the fact that we need to give credence to this psycho, socio, spiritual. I'm having my own fears, anxieties, etc. I'm also being looked at socially isolated. I have nowhere to go, no support system. And also I'm a very God-fearing, ritualistic person, and I keep questioning God as to why these things are happening to me. And these three components come together to bring that overall quality of life, and that's what I want to make. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rajam.
There is a question that is coming from Aparna Iyer. Is there a committee which exists to deal with cases on palliative care in Mumbai? Dr. Iyer, would you care to answer this question, please? I think that's a question that a lot of people would have, the people who logged on right now.
So to be honest with you, there are not all hospitals in the city don't have a palliative care department. Having said that, there are if they contact the Mumbai Palliative Care Network, which I think towards the end we will share the numbers of where they can contact at least different parts of the city, we can definitely get in touch. However, what happens regularly with non-cancer palliative, again, the focus does remain a lot on cancer. With non-cancer palliative, I think the request is to get in touch with that particular specialty doctor, and then they probably get in touch with, say, somebody who's trained in palliative care as a part of the Mumbai Palliative Care Network, and then we explain to them the procedure, and we explain to the family doctor and handhold the family doctor with the protocols, etc., that we use in palliative care medicine with the pharmacological tip, identify if there's a need for counseling and psychology, like Dr. Ganpati pointed out, because it is very, very important to realize that a patient who's actively dying or who's been suffering a long journey of a chronic illness, the entire family suffers with him. The caregivers, including, there's a lot of stress and social psychological factors. So we assess the need for that. And so we handhold that particular physician, and we also refer to the counselor, and we also talk to the family GP if the patient decides to be at home towards end of life. So there is a method in this chaotic structure and in this basic, nascent stages of palliative care that we are still offering. But like everybody said, it is promising. We need people to start asking for palliative care, which is why the webinar. The more people are aware of it and they start asking their doctors and asking that I don't want this. The fact that people exercise their right, saying that they have a right to choose and refuse treatment. Here what happens is very often they get emotionally blackmailed into saying that if this is to be done, then this will happen to me. But the important point is, from doctors, we need to be more realistic, empathetic, compassionate, lay out the options and support the patient and the family in the decision making. And this doesn't happen. And like Dr. Baman said, this takes time, and busy consultants don't have the time, which is where we need the integration and to work with palliative care as a team. Like Dr. Mukadan has been kind enough to start the MD, we'll have more students who are postgraduate in specialized in palliative medicine to therefore probably occupy various positions at different hospitals. Like Konkana mentioned or Sonalini mentioned, I think healthcare professionals themselves are not aware of palliative care. They feel it's giving up. They feel it's end of the road. Very often I have colleagues who ask me, why are you taking care only of cancer patients? Don't you get sick and tired of dealing with death all the time? And it's not just end of life. We are completely pro-life. And I think talking and thinking about death makes us look at life very differently. The perspective changes. You value it more, and you value your relationships, your emotions, your everyday much more. And I think even the pandemic has brought death and dying into such a sharp focus that we really need to think of, all of us need to sit and think of how we would like to be looked after towards the end of life and document it for a better way to exit this world.
Thank you so much. Sorry, Swati. I just want to add that, see, I want to just re-emphasize what Rajam said. People think that palliative care is cancer. It's not. In fact, I think there's more in non-cancer than there is in cancer. And we're really trying to work hard now. So Hinduja has, KEM has, we're going to be starting a new center in King George Memorial Home. You know, there are going to be places which are coming up. Bhakti Vedanta has, Cardinal Gracious Hospital has. So, you know, in that sense, it's coming up. But, you know, with the program like this, the number of people who listen today I think the onus is also on the public. It's not just on us doctors. We among ourselves try to do our best. But I think this is something which is so important, a session like this. I think the public needs to demand that every hospital, not just cancer, every hospital should have a palliative care unit. And yes, you know, it's not just doctors, it's a team. It's doctors, nurses, social workers. I think the key to when I started palliative care, the key to me was volunteers, because sometimes you just can't afford it. The hospital is going to turn around and tell you, I've been trying to do this in Holy Spirit and Holy Family. And they're going to say, oh, but where's the budget? Okay, you give us a part-time doctor, give us a part-time nurse, but let's have a lot of volunteers. In our hospital in Tata, we have at least 25 volunteers or maybe 30 volunteers, I think by now. So they come, they give up their valuable time. In fact, they are such an asset because they are people who have time on their hands, and rather than going for, you know, spending time and enjoying themselves, they come with the want, with the want to help others. And it's just, I think our unit would never have run if we didn't have so many volunteers. So I think I would request that at the end of this session, everybody should start demanding, I want to die with dignity. Doctor, make it happen. And not just in cancer.
That's beautifully put, Dr. Mukadan. There is a subsidy, a question that has arisen, which I'd like to ask you. It has come from one of our viewers, Susan Barton. She asks, is there a way your organization can train family caregivers and volunteers? And does palliative care deal with a holistic way of dealing with patients?
Yeah, so to answer the last one first, which is easy, yeah, that's exactly what palliative care is all about. It is to improve the quality of life. And therefore, we are looking that death is part of life. It's not, we are a death denying society, unfortunately, today. But this wasn't there in the last generation. I think, especially when our grandmothers and grandfathers were getting ready to die, they died at home. I mean, there was no need to go to a hospital. They had the most wonderful, dignified death at home. So, I sometimes wonder, why did it change? I think we've become a death denying society. And yes, of course, there are training programs which Tata Hospital runs, and I'm sure, Rajam, you must be running as well, and there must be other training programs for volunteers. Because volunteers are the need of the hour, and there are, at least we have a training program every year for volunteers, and I hope maybe by the beginning of next year we should be able to have it this year because of the pandemic. And I'm pretty sure that there are training programs for volunteers in our other hospitals in Mumbai. I think Khurshid has, Rajam has. There are lots of trainings for volunteers.
At this point, I think I would also like to add that one of our palliative care network team members is Bhavna. Bhavna has an NGO called caregiversathi.com. And I would request all the caregivers who do such a stupendous job of looking after their loved ones at home and hospital year after year, please do look up her website. And I'm sure together with Bhavna's help, we can organize some training sessions for caregivers. It's been in the pipeline for us for a while. So we can take a discussion, and, if we have more interested caregivers, we can surely try and arrange sessions for them to make them more enabled and empower them. So to prevent something like what Konkana said is, the caregivers feel assured when they rush to the hospital because they feel there's somebody to look after the patient. But if we empower the caregivers and the family doctor, which somewhere in this whole area of specialization, the family doctor has been completely forgotten and has become a rare entity. We really need to bring him back into the focus and into the family role so that he can be a great mediator between the patient, family, the palliative care and the specialist. Because currently what happens is the hospitals are also overburdened. With COVID, the non-COVID patients are struggling. So if we empower everybody, I suppose it is a better healthcare, considering we do not have universal healthcare in this country. So I think we should look at caregiver. That's an excellent point. And I think Bhavna will definitely consider that, and do look up caregiversathi.com.co.in, and it will really make a difference. She's also put it up on the chat box. Sorry, Swati.
Not at all. Is Dr. Dhabar still with us? Because there's a question that's come in for him. Doctor? Okay, I'll read the question out, and I request any one of you eminent panelists to answer that. How do you deal with resistance where the patient is ready, but due to mindsets and biases of leaving the person to die, the family is resistant to palliation? Is there anyone who would like to answer?
So I'll start it. I'm sure Dr. Mukadan can add on to it. I think it takes all sorts to make this world. We will never have an easy cakewalk in every situation. So if the family is resisting to palliation, I think they have their values and beliefs. And therefore, we as palliative care doctors need time to explore their fear, their values, why they are doing this. Instead of taking it as a no, we really need to go with them and walk with them to find out why, and then start exploring and trying to treat that. And therefore, again, we need time. We are not magicians. We need time to build that rapport. We need time to explore their fears, values, and beliefs. So if we get referred to the very end, like most of the time we do even today, we really can't do the justice for what the patient, in the end, I think the patient, poor thing, doesn't get the dignity and the respect he or she deserves. Therefore, early palliative care integration, form the bond, make it more realistic, let them get the time to process and analyze, and therefore, they will also be more prepared. Like Dr. Marianne said, we have become a death denying society. Like Siddhartha Mukherjee says in his book that honestly, we really, and Atul Gawande says that we have forgotten how to die. We've medicalized death so much, and even doctors are trained to think that death is a failure. And in all this, we have realized that we are constantly trying to overcome death. While we need to step back, see what the patient wants, and therefore give what the patient should be getting at this point. Dr. Marianne, would you like to add something?
I think you put it very succinctly, Rajam. It sounds really great, because what I feel is like, I mean, we look at these young boys, who come with their father. They know that the father is going to die. The father probably knows that he's going to die, but he's come from a small little village. And that village is not going to take him back if he comes back with a dead body or with a cremated body. It's just that they wouldn't be able to understand this. And that is why the communication is the key. Very often doctors also are afraid to, they kind of feel that, oh, my reputation will go, and what will the patients say, and will I get my patients back if all the patients die on me? So, I mean, it's the whole thing is such a mess, because as you very rightly said, since we are death denying, that young boy is not going to listen if I tell him, your papa is too ill, his general condition is too bad, and I can't push medicines into him. But he's not going to accept it, and therefore it's all about communication, and it's all about time. So Rajam, I think you put it very well, and please, we again appeal to the public, come early, give us time.
And I would just like to add to another point, people are happy writing a financial will. You really need to evolve and become a mature society and start writing your advanced care plans and start talking about death and dying in your respective homes. I feel now more than ever, because of the COVID pandemic, it is at everybody's doorsteps, and it is a very cruel illness, and things really turn rapidly for the worse. All the more reason that we really need to focus on these issues so that we treat our loved ones the way they wish to be treated. So advanced care plan, discuss it. It's not out as a law. The logistical procedure is difficult, but talk to your family, talk to your GP, talk to your specialist, document your wishes. It will not go unheard. And that's important. We need to make a beginning somewhere.
So that's called a living will. I think you've already spoken about the living will, right? So, I mean, now, after the Supreme Court judgment of 2018, one can make a living will, and it is valid. It's legally valid. So I suggest all of you think about making a living will. It doesn't have to be done only for old. It can be done for young people also.
So Swati, Dr. Baman is back. If you wanted to address that question to him.
Yes, doctor, there was a question that what happens if a patient is prepared for, palliation, but the family is resisting? Have you come across such experiences in your practice, and how would you deal with it?
You said the patient wants palliative care.
Yes, if the patient is ready, but the family is unwilling.
Family is unwilling. Yeah, it's a situation that is true. There was once a paper where it was reverse. That they had shown a video showing that if the patient is terminal, and if you want to, what are the terminal patients can go through? Like putting him on a ventilator, putting him on an endotracheal tube, putting him on a ventilator. So first, most of the patients and the relatives said, yes, we want to do it. When they showed an actual video, the patient said, no, I don't want to do it. And when the relatives also saw the video, how the actual procedure is there, most of the relatives also said, we don't want it. So we should just try to explain to them that this is all a waste. It's not a waste, we would say. We would say that this is not going to help. I usually tell them to put a person in a tunnel if there is a light. If there is no light in the tunnel, still you want to put, we'll put. But of course, we have to hear to the patient's will also.
Thank you very much, doctor. Really appreciate you answering
Just
that.
one thing I want to make.
To add to this, one more point. many times patients feel that when the oncologist is telling them to go to palliative care, they are being abandoned by the oncologist. So if there is, if they move together in the trajectory, if they work together, then the patient doesn't feel so alienated. Second thing is that there's this myth about palliative care that it's end of life. So they start getting worried. They start getting worried that, now that I have been referred to palliative care means there's no more hope for me. But if this whole concept of palliative care changes, if they know that this is comfort care, that this is, because we work together with Dr. Dabar, we've had many patients like this who've been extremely reluctant to come to us in the initial stages. But once they come, once they experience what the care that they're getting, that's when the inhibition drops. And they also know that the oncologist is there at any stage when they want to go to the oncologist, they can always go back.
Right.
I think that also is very comforting and it needs to be emphasized.
Great. That's good to know. And I'm glad you brought it up. There are two questions. I'm going to ask them both together and request anyone to answer them. One is are there economic constraints to palliative care? Is it that palliative care is only for those who can afford it, and for those who can't, it's a painful exit? And the second question comes from our viewer Pooja, who asks, is there a template to write the advanced care plan or a living will? How do we write one, and what aspects do we need to get into?
Before we take this question, I just want to make one more point, and that is we spoke about, this family not telling the patient not telling the family. In our current module of communication, where we especially take it to the doctors, to the psychologists, social workers, we have a module called as dealing with difficult communications. And essentially, we focus on collusion between family and the patient, between the family members, between the doctor and the patient. So therefore, as Dr. Rajan mentioned, this collusion is not something that we can address it just as in an isolated capsule manner. It's over a period of time, the kind of, therapeutic, a relationship that you have built up with the family and the patient. You have to exactly show them what happens, what is the cost of hiding this truth, and how is the patient's quality of life going to be improved if this is shared. There has to be some kind of structure that is very, very important in this communication, and not leave it just to chance, saying that, okay, somebody can say it like this. But the real challenge is the time, as she said. We do not get enough time to prepare either the patient or the caregivers psychologically. So that's one thing. Now over to the question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Swati, can I respond to the question on economics and finances?
Yes, please.
One of the important things to realize is that palliative care services, ironically, are free of charge. Ironically, one of the most valuable streams of medicine, you do not pay. On the contrary, very often it saves very poor families from huge financial disaster and expense, which they would have otherwise incurred on investigations and treatments that would have been completely futile. And there's also one more point that I would really like to emphasize here on how it really touches each one of us. And that's a little projection statistic that I want to share with you all. And going forward, it is expected that only 1 out of 10 of us would be lucky enough to have a quick death. 9 out of 10 would go towards some kind of bed-bound existence before we pass on. So this is something with an increasingly aging population and NCDs. This is something that's going to touch each one of us individually. And I think we need to keep that in mind. And it is a free service. It's an incredibly free service.
Thank you for letting us know that. It's great to know that it's a free service.
I just want to add to that. Yeah, Dr. Marianne, you go on.
Okay, so I just, what I want to say is, I think the question was more like, when you don't have money, the doctor won't offer you something, and therefore you'll go to palliative care. Whereas if you have money, why don't you try targeted therapy, or why don't you try this injection, or, kind of stuff like that?
No, I don't think that was the question. No, okay. Doctor. The question was, is palliative care something that only the rich can access? I mean, does it cost a lot? Can it be done at home? Even if you have a very small home, even if you have very, very poor resources, I think that is where the question was coming from.
Okay, great. So I mean that question I think Sonali answered very beautifully, but I kind of want to emphasize what maybe a lot of perception patients have, that if I have money, I'll get treatment. If I don't have money, I can't afford it. I think that is again and again where communication comes in, and I don't want to blow our trumpet or something like that, but that is where in Tata Hospital especially we have what we call tumor boards. So when the decision is being taken to whether this patient's treatment should continue or not, then the palliative care team is also part of that decision making. Because then here is where we can very much emphasize that, see, your treatment is actually more toxic rather than giving benefit. And maybe this is the time when you need to be switching to a trajectory where you can have shared care. You may have go for some oral chemotherapy, you may go for some palliative radiation, but please introduce us to the family so that they come to know this team who's there to give holistic care. And holistic care is not looking at, increasing the number of months, which is how doctors measure and patients also measure, but it's looking at the quality of life which the patient has. And that can't be really measured in months or days, but it is looking at every day and, how much best possible can I get out of that day.
I also just want to clarify the point that yes, NGOs offer free palliative care service. However, in private hospitals, it is not free and therefore can be a hindrance to certain patients saying, oh, I have to pay the neurologist, the nephrologist, and now the palliative care. Having said that, those people who can afford private care can afford this because, like Sonalini said, a lot of medical futilities are not done to the patient. So therefore, a lot of money can be saved, especially in those which is not indicated. So the private sector, obviously, palliative care services are not free. However, because palliative care will keep people out of ICUs, or for those who are not indicated to be in ICUs, for those people who are poor candidates of ICUs or those who have a poor outcome, obviously a lot of money is saved, a lot of torture is saved, and also a lot of medical futilities is saved. So NGOs, yes, do offer free palliative care, but not so necessarily in the private. And somewhere I think the mindset of Indians also is that if it is free, it might not be the best. So I think it has to be a balance. What is important is that everybody realizes it's their right to ask for comfort, to refuse treatment, to understand the logistics of their illness, to make a decision. It is my care. It is my body. I need to make that decision. That's the first pillar of medical ethics. I cannot be told this is good for you because in my experience, it works for 30 other patients. You can say it works like this in 30 other patients. Therefore, would it be an option for you? It's very important. And this is also not taught to us in medical school. We really need to start engaging medical ethics into daily practice and do what is in the best interest of the patient and not what we think is best for him. So that is one. And the second point is obviously, like Dr. Marianne has been saying, that it's the total care, and for that we need time. And it's the best part about palliative care, it's not I, me, myself. It's a team, and team works fabulously because very often patients are intimidated by talking to doctors. So there is a nurse, then there is a counselor, there's a social worker, there's a volunteer. So there are other people with whom probably patients open up much easier, because sometimes doctors can look very busy and look very flustered and not wanting to answer so many questions. So it helps working in a team, and that's the beauty of palliative care. You learn from each other, you're there to support each other, and you're also self-caring for each other and protecting each other. So it really works very well to work in a team. I think it's the joy of working in a team that keeps me going to work every day.
Thank you. And doctor, is there anyone who would like to answer the question about a format for a living will?
It's on the ICMR website as far as I know, unless I'm wrong. And therefore, I think you can download the living will from the ICMR website, fill it. It has to be signed, I think, by your, one of your next of kin. You have to decide who's your surrogate, and that's it. I mean, it's
alternatively we can share it on our Mumbai Palliative Care Facebook page. We'll share the link once we get off. So in the next 24 hours we can share it for sure from the ICMR website.
Can I say something quickly?
Sure, please.
Yeah, it's just that to say that about the charges, even if the NGO is providing it free, there is a cost to palliative care because the NGO has to obtain the funds from someone else. So then isn't it good to have it as a my right, my comfort, my right? Hence it becomes mandatory to do whatever that is necessary to provide for the services, even if it is at a particular cost. So if you don't do this, one is that free services are never added sort of value because there has to be a value. And the second thing is that we do not want to create a concept of charity. It is not charity. It is my right to receive proper palliative care. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaita.
I think we have covered a lot of the questions, and we've had an extremely robust, very lively conversation here. And is there anything else, Dr. Iyer or Dr. Mukhadan, Dr. Dhaber, Sonalini ma'am, anyone, Konkana ji, if anybody would like to say something before we, wind down? Is there anything else to be added?
I think all I want to say is that I think most human beings today, if you ask, I don't know how many people we have on this call, there'll be very few who will say that they want to go to the ICU and be put on the ventilator or have tubes in every orifice. So we really need to there's an appeal for all of us here who will probably should think of your own mortality. One, talk to elders in your house or those with comorbidities. They're waiting to be spoken to. We don't like to talk about death in our society, and it is brushed under the carpet. It's better. It's a difficult conversation. It's a difficult decision, but it's better to do it than not to do it, because not doing it is even more difficult for you, for the patient, for the family, for your bank balance, for your stress levels, for everybody. So I think it's very important to do that decision, communicate to your doctors. There has to be a plan. We really need to work to a plan. And it's like, who is deciding the last journey of your life? It has to be you. It cannot be some ICU doctor who has never even seen you in your life and who decides to put you on the ventilator. You have to be the champion of your life. And like rightly said, it is my care, my comfort. It has to be your decision. So I think that is the simple request for all of the people who have joined in to spread the word, ask for palliative care, ask for dignity and respect for your loved ones and for yourselves.
It's been an absolutely amazing conversation, and it's becoming clearer and clearer to me that just as we focus so much on the art of living, we really also need to focus on the art of dying.
So true.
And with the program now drawing to a close, may I request Dr. Khurshid Mistry, trustee of N.K. Dhaber Cancer Foundation and the head of On Care Cancer Wellness and Palliative Care Center, to kindly conclude the proceedings.
So thank you very much, Swati. I normally end my sessions with, if we cannot change the outcome, we can definitely affect the journey. And I think this encapsulates what palliative care is totally in a nutshell. So I've been given this honor of giving a vote of thanks, and it's a proud privilege for me. I would, to start with, like to thank Swati Bhatkal for moderating the session so beautifully and sparing her time with us. Dr. Baman Dhaber, who although is such a busy medical oncologist, and Konkana Sen, I don't think we can thank you enough for really sharing your personal experiences and sharing your own story. And of course, the remaining are all part of our members of our own family. But yet, I would like to thank Dr. Rajam, Dr. Mary, and Dr. Sonalini for all being part of this beautiful, beautiful conversation. I think I am going to take a few minutes to just run through all the people who are part of our Mumbai Palliative Care Network. You have seen a few faces and you've heard a few voices, but there are many, many more behind the scene who have contributed to this entire webinar. So I would like to start. So as I don't know if somebody's mentioned, the Mumbai Palliative Care Network is a conglomeration of NGOs, of private hospitals, public hospitals, private practitioners. So I'll start with some of the organizations which are PalCare, part of the Jimmy S. Bilamoria Foundation, On Care, which I run, part of the NK Dabar, Romila Palliative Care Center, which is part of SNEHA, JASCAP, which is another organization, NGO. There are plenty of hospitals, Tata Memorial Hospital being one of them, the Asian Cancer Institute, the Bhai Jarbai Wadia Hospital, BRC Hospital, Bhakti Vedanta Hospital and Research Institution, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Hospital, Kalwa, which is a pediatric palliative care, the Cardinal Kokilabai Dhirubhai Ambani Hospital, Nanavati Super Speciality Hospital, the PD Hinduja National Hospital and Medical Research Center, and the Prince Ali Khan hospitals. So as you see, there are a lot of private and government hospitals here. We have individual practitioners and they have contributed equally to this whole thing. Dr. Leena Ganguly, who takes care of the geriatric. There's Dr. Mohini Wagmare, Dr. Rucha Patil, and Dr. Sunil Dilwal. And we have, unfortunately, only 2 hospices in Bombay. One, and the most important one, being the Shanti Avedna, but yet again, it's only for cancer patients. And I think there is definitely a need for more hospice centers which gives palliative care, not just to cancer patients, but to all. Hospice center, which also I think is only for cancer patients. These are the links from where you can get, because I think they're working as to how to contact these NGOs, or and I put these links also on the chat, and you can also earn from us whenever you want. If you go to the Mumbai Palliative, and you will get all the details, including contact details of all the doctors. I would like to thank Intas Oncology for helping us out with the technical support and providing us the Zoom platform. So thank you very much. And I think I will take advantage of this auspicious occasion of the World Hospice and Palliative Care Day. And we would like to inaugurate a special certificate course in palliative care, which we are going to be running along with the PD Hinduja Hospital and the Life Supporters Institute of Health Sciences. This is going to start from the coming week, from the 17th. We've taken this opportunity to inaugurate this, the program today. The actual lectures and the program will start from 17th October, which is the coming Saturday. And we would definitely urge all healthcare practitioners to enroll in this course if they need any further training. So at the end, I would like to thank everybody once again, and thank you for making this webinar so interesting and so successful. Thank you. The Intas team can take over, please, and stop the live recording.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.